Be nice to feel that soothed all the time. At least when you wanted to. Of course, you can. That's the trick. So you've heard me say it before. Salvation is freedom from fear. And we have reflected on it a time or two together. Salvation is freedom from fear, and that doesn't mean that there is no more fear. It means that you are free of its tyranny. That king no longer rules your land. That you recognize it, know it for what it is, but compel it to serve you rather than you being in its thrall. And also when I say fear, I don't mean in this sense acute fear, like the fear of a snake or a charging bear. That's good fear. I want you not to feel that fear. I mean a more general chronic fear that often arises from our subconscious and is not always easy to identify. It lives in our lizard brain most of the time. I mean a fear that sets up the tripwires that booby trap your relationship with your spouse or kids or lovers or fellow congregants. I mean the fear of being wanted too much or the fear of not being wanted enough. I mean the fear of control or lack of control. Salvation is freedom from those fears. Now, some of these fears are easy to find and others are not. But if you could imagine just for a moment, what would it be like to be free from those fears? You see, one of the things that fear does is triggers the fight or flight or flop response. So if you want to know if you're having trouble locating where your fear is or if you're afraid to look, it's pretty easy. Find that from which you run. Find that to which you react in anger. Or find that which depresses you. 9 times out of 10, you'll be getting pretty close to the root of fear there. 9 times out of 10, when you're getting angry, there's fear at the root of it. Fear divides us from our loved ones. Fear divides us from ourselves. And fear leads to emotional violence done to one another and our own self. It breeds anger and ignorance, and anger and ignorance are destructive. And where fear does not lead to anger or ignorance, which is other ways of saying fight or flight, when it does not lead to anger or ignorance, it leads to acquiescence. Acquiescence is the flop response. Go fetal. Die before you get killed. That's fear, and it plagues us because in a life that is nothing, if not uncertain, we somehow crave certainty. Now that is an insane making psychological arrangement. Life is uncertain and we insist on certainty, and that generates fear. But it is the arrangement that our species has crafted with circumstance from the beginning of time. But it's not necessary. It is deeply, deeply habitual to the point where it's probably culturally inherited and genetically connected, but it is not the final word. Both science and religion are responses to this arrangement. The primary function of religion, as far as I can tell, is to be the lens of meaning through which the torrent of experience can make sense. For me, religion is a lens of meaning through which the torrent of experience can make sense. It is very much like language. It is the language of meaningfulness. So sometimes religion aspires to make the uncertain certain. Sometimes it seeks to make the uncertain at least something we can accept. And sometimes religion seeks to integrate into uncertainty, to face it, to move with it and find wisdom there. There are prominent religions that focus on each one of these paths, right? Making the uncertain certain, accepting it, or moving into it. So the last is the most attractive to me most of the time, but I know I have found power and comfort in all three perspectives in my life, and I would not want to lose two at the cost of my preferred, which is why I'm a Unitarian Universalist. All of these perspectives on uncertainty address the central poison uncertainty produces in our systems, and that poison is fear. So by virtue of you being here, you have already made a testament in some way, acknowledged that fear is an issue and that you want to do something about it. You may not have known that, but in fact, that is part of why you are all here. I think I have mostly characterized this struggle against fear as an internal pursuit. Today and in prior reflections, I have tended to frame the freedom from fear in personal terms, or perhaps as the effort of a small collection of souls, namely those gathered here under this roof. Give back to God what is God's. However, what is true for us personally is also true for us as a society. It is also true in Caesar's realm. You see, fear leads to anger, right? Socially, that means fear leads to Ferguson, to extremists, to greed, to violence. Fear leads to ignorance, to the supposed safety of a group that self-identifies the same as you. A sin we frequently flirt with, by the way. But that is a Russian doll of isolation that leads nowhere but to smaller and smaller concentrations of ego. Fear also leads to the social flop of non-engagement, non-voting, non-response, confusing the comfort of wall-to-wall whatever and a 72-inch screen with salvation. This is the myth of security. Though there is something there. It is, after all, easier to pursue the final and personal quest for freedom from fear when one is not worried about feeding one's children or oneself. And this is true. And this is where we're going today. The underlying point is this: our culture is sick with fear. Now, as cousin to original sin and consciousness, fear is a human condition, and so always will exist in our cultures. But from time to time, we witness surges of fear that wreck lives and ruins countries. So think of Nazi Germany. Think of Mississippi's reaction to the 1960s. Think post-9/11 America. Think Arpaio and Brewers, Arizona. Yes, we are in the midst of a surge of fear right now, but there is a way out. And you can help us get there. So it is time to wake up. Time to mingle our calling with those who will share. Because if we don't, we are what? We are flopping. We acquiesce. When we succumb to fear, when we do not seek or find the freedom from it, we are then vulnerable to violent exploitation. The powerful have used fear to manipulate the masses for centuries. It is so historically common as to be a sub-attribute of concentrated power. And to think that the forces of concentrated power have stopped exploiting the masses because they are American is foolish. And to think that they have stopped because we live in an enlightened age is hysterical. Indeed, particularly since September 11th of 2001, fear has been used to justify the erosion of freedom and the further concentration of wealth and influence. Now, this creates a nasty spiral of fear, which is advantageous to the concentration of power and harmful to the sacred cause of democracy and human dignity. We are living in an era whose underlying attribute is fear. Do you sense this? It has turned us against our countrymen and women. It has depressed democracy. It has led to death here at home, throughout the land, and abroad. But there is an antidote. And to discover it, we must reflect on the foundations of fear. How is it with us, and where does it begin? So I suppose books can be written on the topic. I'm going to narrow it down to a sentence or so. I suppose fear is founded in the imagination of death and in existential, or at least sensational, uncertainty. And the closer the cause of fear is to actual death or existential uncertainty, the more compelling it is. So, for instance, when your job is insecure, when your bills are too high, when you can't find a good occupation, you are easier to manipulate because you are more susceptible to fear. Now, you might get angry, but that anger is often shaped in such a way that it finds scapegoats rather than fundamental and systemic causes to correct. And those scapegoats can be a person of a different party, a person of a different race, a person who enjoys a different news channel than you do. Again, I'm not talking about everyone, I'm just talking about you. Now, given our current situation where the middle class has been eroded, where working class is no longer middle class but struggling to make ends meet, where the power is increasingly concentrated in capital, on Wall Street, and in D.C., is it any wonder then that the incidence of violence against colored people in this country is now commonplace on the news? Racism is the most easily exploited scapegoat. We see this in our own state, in our immigration policies. Is it any wonder that as the discrepancy between the top and the bottom has grown, so too has the politics of fear, a politics exploited by many of our elected and appointed officials? And of course, in this time, what is the most popular news source but the news source that feeds fear first? The economic situation in our country is one of the roots of fear that have eroded our democracy and divided peoples. So fear is a constant, but it does have triggers, and economic uncertainty is one of them. Our times have been coaxed or allowed to become frightening. And so our country is afraid. It's no surprise that Martin Luther King's evolution saw him, at the last, focusing his efforts on economic concerns. To ameliorate racism, he discovered he needed to wipe out poverty. And is it any coincidence that the most social progress we have made as a country was in that golden era of relative economic equality between 1945 and 1978? So what happens in a country where fear is rampant and where fear fuels the powerful? We see the gap between the top and the rest widening, and fear increases. The rest are pitted against each other and outsiders, and fear increases. People are made less secure by an economy allowed and even designed to malfunction. So manipulation is made easier. Everyone is on edge when the bills come due. Families bicker, tempers are short. Violence is quick to come, blame easy to lay, and lay at the feet of those near or different looking or just over there. Fear dominates and we fight, or we flee, or we acquiesce. So what can we do? Well, actually, there's a number of things we can do. Some are personal spiritual work to free yourself from fear, pursue your anger, your ignorance, and your acquiescence to its source. Face it, and know that it has no power over you. The Buddhists have this practice of meditating on the bones, where you meditate and imagine the worst consequence down to the final worst consequence, and discover at the end of the day that it's okay. That you are bigger than that fear. But you could also work to change systems of power that fuel social fear. You could work to change the economy that compromises relationships and leave the masses vulnerable to the manipulation of the powerful. For left unchecked, and it has been left unchecked, what happens is that dignity is denigrated and democracy destroyed, sold to the highest bidder, and indeed, that is what has happened, and that is what is happening now. In your lifetime, the legacy that we leave has this trajectory. And it's not somebody else's fault, and it's not somebody else's problem. But we are told we are beginning to see the recovery from the Great Recession. I put it to you that it's a false recovery, because all the lessons that we should have learned from it have not been learned. We are setting up the exact same system. And what do? We acquiesce. We are in a national flop. But I say no more. And actually, you say no more. Because you have empowered myself, MVUU's Justice Coordinating Committee, and this entire congregation to partner with systemic change agents. And one of those, Arizonans for a New Economy, is at the forefront. Seriously, they're at the forefront of the fight to restore dignity to the middle class and legitimacy to democracy. And the lever that they are using to shift that weight is public banking. So you need to have a song like Wake Now My Senses when you have a sermon that concerns public banking. Because the one is in danger of snoozing you all out, right? But in short, public banking actually is extremely inspirational. It keeps capital closer to home, rather than lining the pockets of Wall Street hooligans. It creates local economies by releasing capital into the hands of the people here and strengthening the budgetary strength of the state. So some of you were fortunate enough to attend the forum presented by Arizonans for a New Economy this past Thursday. Now somehow these people who attended showed up to listen to a forum about the least exciting topic possible next to mollusk marathons, right? Banking. But how many people, show of hands, went? Was it amazing? Was it exciting?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you get inspired?
Hallelujah!
Hallelujah! What did you learn, Tom? One thing. What's one thing that stuck out? Just one bullet point.
There's a lot we can do.
There's a lot we can do. Okay. Anybody else? I just a little, yes, Sabella.
Just the hope that eventually maybe when students make ridiculous bets, they will be able to get out of it.
Getting out of student debt is a possibility. Anybody else? Conrad.
That there are ways that we can work with people we disagree with to
Yeah.
That's right. The leader on this effort is a extremely conservative Republican named, his last name is Farnsworth. And he's leading the charge, along with our own LD9 rep, Senator Farley, who was here to speak with us. So it's an amazing opportunity. It's real. And it's happened before. It's in North Dakota's had its public bank for 50 years or so. So it's not a pie in the sky deal. North Dakota, by the way, did fine in the recession. And they were doing fine before fracking was popular. So you are all already on the spiritual path by virtue of your being here today and working with each other throughout the week. We see the highest in one another and are called to meet it, and we see the fear in each other and are called to compassion. And that is a spiritual practice, my friends, and it is powerful. Remember that you're doing it. Remember that you're doing it. But we can and do also work to create a source of power and advocacy to facilitate systemic change in our state and country that reduces the fear in our community, in our broader community. Public banking is a very powerful tool to correct the balance of power. And that in turn reduces fear, which revitalizes participation, increases the sense of self-worth in our community, and decreases the incidence of scapegoat and fear-based violence. So be alert. Be patient, but be ready, and participate. When the call comes, and it will come, respond. Indeed, here is a call even right now. This Friday night and Saturday, we will gather with our UU kin in Southern Arizona at a mission and vision workshop at UUCT. That's the 22nd Street Church. Come. Come and shape this community, because this community is a bulwark against fear and a gymnasium of compassion and courage. And then come to the UU Day at the legislature on President's Day. And prior to that, come to the training. You could sign up for that training with Richard Kopp. He'll be in the fireside room after church. If you'll seek him. Richard, you want to wave? Where are you? There you are. Find that man, sign up, give him a long afternoon. And then come to the training and come visit your legislators. Yeah. Do not acquiesce. Do not scapegoat or lash out. Do not allow yourselves to be slaves to fear. Let our senses wake. Let us love the hell out of the world by empowering local economies. Amen.